Okay, so we're going to go over something really, really boring, which is the OTA process. You've seen really much more boring than what Mark was going over. You've seen some of the initial slides. I save 4 or 5 slides at the end that if we have time, I think I really would like to go over them because it gives you perspective on the timeline that OTAs take. I think for the research admin team, it gives you awareness of how the process flows and what happens behind the scene. And I'm giving the information based on what I did to stand up the OTA process at DITRA. Okay, so everyone knows that you've probably seen this at LinkedIn. This is not my slide, source is GIU. There is a contracting cone. Everyone is very comfortable in the blue side, the FAR-based side, very much governed. There's clear guidance. Everything is provided. There's extreme amount of laws and regulation, and Penn State excels in this side, right? The green side is what I call the creative side. It is where the Department of Defense, US government, and Congress has given the different agency an ability to speed up acquisition. Because as you know, Department of Defense acquisition is quite slow and extensive and very much not geared towards moving innovation forward. Where OTAs exist is 2371 Bravo is specific to DoD and US government in supporting the men and women in uniform. And it's strictly for prototyping. Now, other agencies like Homeland Defense and CDC and BARDA could also use prototyping, even though the authority belongs to the US government, because as long as it is a technology that can be shared by both folks that are first responders as well as military. So you will often see a solicitation that says DITRA, but the funding source is NASA. So the technology that we had proposed to for like Dr. Ibrahimi, Dr. Guan, and Dr. Ye, they were actually being driven by DITRA, but the proposing organization was actually NASA. So it gets kind of complicated, but the authority belongs to DoD. Anyone in government can use it, or any other agency. Okay, I won't belabor this because you've seen this. The other transaction authority has been around for quite some time since NASA has been here. That was the first authority that came out. And then in 1996, that was extended permanently to the Department of Defense. And quite in the last few years, the laws and regulation related, or the guidance related to OTA for the Department of Defense has kind of been expanded to ensure that we move innovation a little faster in the Department of Defense. And now you can use an OTA. The beauty of something like what Dr. Guan is doing with the ChemBio, like ECBC, we'll just do that. They have a new name, it's called CBC now. The beauty with having an OT project is that follow-on projects is essentially sole source with Dr. Guan, right? So that means if the government takes his prototype and it's viable and they want to mass produce it, Dr. Guan is in there from the very beginning. He doesn't have to recompete. And then Dr. Guan can then solicit external partners beyond what he's able to produce here at Penn State to do the mass production. It's beautiful because then you no longer have to go back and do another acquisition for the next phase of that prototype production. So what is it? Essentially, it is an agreement that allows the US government to get prototypes in a much faster way and in a more collaborative way to ensure that what we get in the end, or what we give the government in the end, is truly what they need. The Department of Defense acquisition system is so inflexible that Congress provided this authority to correct that. Is it being utilized heavily? Not yet, but it's getting there. The other component of OTs are the concept of non-traditional and small business, as well as academic partners, right? They want to make sure they understand that innovation exists in those small businesses, in the academia, or some of the non-traditional performers, because non-traditional doesn't necessarily mean small. It could also be Google, who refuses to work with the government, by the way, who has something that the government wants because they have the manpower and the capital to be able to move innovation forward. If a non-traditional or a small business or an academic or a nonprofit organization is not part of the OT award process, whoever is that large company that wins have to give a cost share into that project. But large companies like Leidos and Northrop Grumman have really solved this issue in that they go out and they try to find that non-traditional and add them to their team. As long as there's a critical component that that non-traditional is bringing into the project, they've met the gate for that. Okay, so we've already talked about the US code 2371 Bravo. That is the law that guides OTs. There's three components. There has to be a purpose. Primarily, it is a warfighter or men in uniform purpose, or anything that improves their systems that they can use wherever they are all over the world or in homeland. It's got to be some kind of a prototype, a widget. It doesn't have to be something you hold. It could be something that is an algorithm. It could be an idea of something that we're benchmarking that everyone can use. And it has to have a participation from those non-traditional. Three components, very simple. Why would we use this? We've kind of talked about it a little bit. It reduces the government's oversight. I mean, that burden on regular contracts and the time and effort it takes for contracting officers to make something like that happen, you lift that burden and you kind of execute at a much faster rate. You can take a commercial item, you can take an existing prototype, and as long as you rework that to something that the warfighter can use, then you can use this other transaction authority. Where innovation exists currently is in the biotech companies on the outside and the academic institution, where it didn't used to be 20 decades or 20 years ago, right? 20 years ago, it was the DARPAs and the DOD that was bringing the GPS and the internet. Now it's the other side that's bringing the innovation. So what the government wants to do is capitalize on that, bring it back to DOD so that we have edge on technology when we're fighting our wars and protecting our people. So what's in it for you as an academic institution? Well, as we have said before, one of three critical components is that non-traditional participation. Well, guess what? You are a non-traditional person. And so big companies are going to want you, just like subsystems. They want us to partner with them, with your science, and you become a critical component of that teaming process. Even large companies with great innovation, they still need the academic partner who has something extremely more novel than perhaps what they know or what they've seen. For example, if there's a squid protein that hides thermal signature, how wonderful could that be? If Dr. Malik could just give us his white paper, we could do so much with that. There is huge funding opportunity, not just from the government, but right now I'm sure you've seen there are venture capitalists that are out there that are sitting on the cusp of innovation and on the cusp of biosecurity or biodefense, and they know that they're just waiting for that one potential spin-out company that they can give money to, right? So the hope is that we facilitate that process for you. Here's the OTA, and if you were here in January, this was actually presented by ATI, which is the consortium management firm for the OTA. This is the spending climb of how many proposals and projects the government is putting through OTs. It says FY18, but that's because that's only through halfway the year. And this is not my slide, but I just wanted to give a representation because I think it gives you great perspective of the climbing investment through this acquisition strategy. So this is what's advertised of how quickly we can award through the OT process. I'm telling you that this is not exactly what happens. This is actually what happens. 150 days is about where we are. I can tell you with Dr. Guan's project, we're gonna hit about 150 something days. We're hoping a little bit less. But the great news about the whole thing is that the delays never occurred on the Penn State side. The delays never occurred on the Penn State side. We were ready 2 weeks before the government was ready for us. How awesome is that, right? But that's teaming. As I was just telling someone, we become an extension of that research team or that OSP or whoever it is that we're working with. We don't want to replace you, we want to partner with you. So currently the ones highlighted are the OTs that Penn State belongs to. And I say Penn State regardless of who's paying the bill for that, because every single college and associated organization within Penn State proper also has this, also belong to these consortium. We are in the process of submitting our membership for MTech, which is the Medical Technology Enterprise Consortium, because there's great interest from the College of Medicine as well as some of the other colleges around Penn State. Okay. I love the saying "we are" because it gives such a perspective and you could use it on anything. I believe Penn ABRL, we are expanding the reach for Penn State. Through you and being able to work with you, that's our role. And if we can lift the burden of the administrivia for the scientists, then that's where we need to be. If we can be the extension for the other research admin team, then that's where we're gonna be. If we need to get you in front of a customer, and that's what you need because you have something novel, we will do everything we can to make sure that you're there. So, before we go, I think we have a little bit of time, right, Mark? Yeah. I was down at the National Mall this weekend. It was so beautiful, and it was such this little mama duck with her baby ducks, and it was just such a beautiful thing. And that's from an iPhone. But before we go to additionally technical timelines, is there any question at this point? Okay. So, what I want to give you is kind of how the process for OTA takes place internally and externally to the government, right? So I built this slide in 2017. I came to DITRA as a clinical laboratory scientist. I work in the lab. I manage people who draws your blood, tests your urine, your what have you, whatever. That's what I did in the Air Force. They were looking for a PhD type at DITRA, and I was not that, right? And the guy who was to be my boss said, it doesn't matter, come on, because I think you're gonna provide something different. And that something different, I didn't even think that it was gonna be some sort of acquisition. What does a medic know about acquisition? But I can tell you this, OTAs and any rapid acquisition is extremely a mindset thing, right? The laws that govern DFARS is like this. The rules that govern OTAs, you guys have seen it, is very small because it makes things very creative. There's still laws that you have to abide by. Fiscal law still applies. Any other laws that the government wants to add in that contract or agreement still applies. There's a lot of flexibility in how we do things. There's a lot of communication. So I wanted to highlight, and this is something that I created because the government PMs didn't even understand how to do OTs and the process that it takes, right? So when there is call for proposal, and they want a white paper or enhanced white paper, at any time a topic is out there, before you submit something to the government, you are free to talk to the government, ask as many questions, hold a meeting, meet with them, do anything, which is something extremely counter to the contracting process, right? Because in a contracting process, the minute that the topic's out there, there is no communication. If it says 30 widgets, and it has to be able to do this, and it was something they made a mistake on, well, guess what? It's gonna stay like that, and you can't ask. You can't correct them, right? So a lot of things like that has happened. The only time you're not allowed to talk is when the government is evaluating your proposal or your white paper, or when the government is evaluating anything that you submitted. Within each of those processes, there is cross-flow of information between the consortium management firm, the program manager that's managing that project, the contracting office, which is, if we deal with ATI, it's in, the Army Contracting Command is in New Jersey, right? You can call anytime, and you can interact with anyone and meet with them. Once the process goes through, each of the lines, so, how do I do this? Okay, never mind. It's 60 days for the top and then 60 days at the bottom, and depending on what's happening, we could save a few things because some things are happening at the same time. And that's the beauty of an OTA. The contracting office could be working on something, the program manager could be working something with you, and then it's moving right along. So once something has been posted and a solicitation occur, these are actually the time it takes for something to happen. So white papers, typically they post something, it's 3 weeks, and you owe them 3 to 5 pages, right? If it's an enhanced white paper, I think they've learned some of their lessons that they need at least 4 to 5 weeks for an enhanced white paper. An enhanced white paper takes a white paper and a proposal, and it's one thing. It's typically 10 to 15 pages. There is a ROM, which is a rough order of magnitude of how much a project is going to cost. And to be honest with you, it should be within 10% of what that project should cost for that thing to happen. So it's not one of those things where you just say, well, I think it's going to be like $30. Right? If it's an enhanced white paper, your research admin team they're crunching the numbers because they want to be able to provide the government as close to the amount possible as they can make it. The full prototype proposal, from the time that it's posted to the time it's due, is typically about 4 weeks, 28 days. And most consortiums will say that their full proposal number is about 20 to 30 pages, which is doable, right? So, once the proposal is received, there's a compliance review that's conducted by the consortium management firm. Then it goes to a technical review by the program manager who has that requirement, which is government. After that, it goes to the contracting office, which is New Jersey, and they do another review to make sure that your proposal meets the scope for that contract. After that, if everything is good to go, they draft the basis of selection, and the OSB will receive that, and they will say, okay, this is a good project, and it meets technical scope. It will then go to legal, and then they will issue it officially to OSB. That whole process will take about 28 days. So Dr. Guan is currently in this timeline. So he was notified that he was selected for the project, and so the first thing that we did was hold a TCON within a day of notification. We then negotiated the SAU, because this is where we negotiate the scope of that project, and that took about a week for us, back and forth. Then the program manager and the contracting office on the government side certifies that package that it's good to go, and then they issue the proposal update letter that says we're all good. And if it's not we're all good, then we provide a response and we correct whatever is needed. Currently, we are in the cost analysis, the agreement officer review, and the proposal updates, because we have submitted everything that's required. So that's gonna take us, that was supposed to take us 6 days, and it's taken the government now nearly 3 weeks, right? Once we get the technical direction letter, the TDL, that is our signal that we can then, with ATI's direction, we can then execute that project, and Dr. Juan will receive the first bolus of funds to get things started. So I kind of covered this a little bit, who's involved in the award process. So there's the customer, which is really your government person that has the requirement. There's the government office that manages the OTA consortium contract with ATI. There's a contracting team in New Jersey. And then there's RDIC, which is also another Army facility that they provide the legal guidance to execute OTAs. OTAs are typically $10 billion it's like a big IDIQ or a UARC. It's a huge, massive contract vehicle, and so they need a legal team assigned to make sure that no laws is being broken. And then there's the offerer, which in this case, Penn State. All of these people are involved in the award process, and there's a great flow of communication that occurs. Okay, so why work with us? I mean, if I was Dr. Guan, and this is not something I do normally, I would be just overwhelmed with the requirements, and I would want a team that could help and understand and knows the inside, who could facilitate the communication, and that's where I would be coming from. If I was UU, I would need an extension of my team that already has this experience to connect with her and work with her directly, right? If I was a research dean, I would be like, hey, anything that you can do to expand funding opportunity, we welcome it. But that's just my take. Just like kind of what Crystal said, we want to know from your perspective how you would like us to help you, how you would like us to work with you, or if you say, we don't want anything to do with ABRL, we welcome that feedback as well, and then we won't bother you very much. Okay, that is all I have.